For more than 40 years, a ghost haunted the state of California. He slipped into quiet neighborhoods under the cover of darkness. He watched families through their windows. He studied their routines. And when the time was right, he entered their homes. Police searched for him across cities like Sacramento and beyond. But every time investigators thought they were close, he disappeared. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No name. Just fear. Then one day, decades later, detectives reopened a forgotten box of evidence. Inside was a clue so small it had been invisible for years. A single strand of DNA. What investigators discovered next would shock the entire country. Because the man they had been searching for had been living quietly among neighbors the entire time. And his name was Joseph James DeAngelo. Now, to understand how one of the most chilling criminal mysteries in American history was finally solved, we have to go back to where it all began. Northern California. The mid-1970s. Where a series of strange crimes first caught the attention of police in Sacramento. At the time, no one realized they were witnessing the beginning of a case that would remain unsolved for decades. In quiet suburban neighborhoods across California, people believed they were safe. Children rode bicycles through tree-lined streets. Families locked their doors at night and assumed nothing could disturb the peace of their communities. But for years, an invisible predator moved through those same neighborhoods. He studied homes. He watched routines. He waited for the right moment. And then he struck. Police chased the mystery for decades. But the man responsible always disappeared. The case slowly turned into one of the most chilling unsolved investigations in American history. Evidence was boxed up. Detectives retired. Families were left without answers. Most people believed the truth would never be found. But decades later, a new detective would reopen those files and discover something investigators in the 1970s could never have imagined. The answer had been hiding inside a strand of DNA all along. The first crimes began quietly in the mid-1970s around Sacramento. At first, police believed they were dealing with simple burglaries. Someone was breaking into homes at night. Drawers were opened. Personal items were moved. Sometimes small objects disappeared. But something felt strange. The burglar seemed to know exactly which homes to target. He knew when people would be sleeping. Investigators began to suspect the person responsible was studying neighborhoods before entering homes. Soon, the crimes escalated. Victims began reporting terrifying encounters with a masked intruder who entered their homes while they slept. The man moved quietly. He whispered threats. And he seemed completely confident that he wouldn't be caught. Police began calling the suspect the East Area Rapist, because the crimes were happening across the eastern suburbs of Sacramento. The more detectives studied the attacks, the more disturbing the pattern became. This was not a random criminal. The suspect stalked neighborhoods weeks before entering homes. Witnesses sometimes noticed strange phone calls. Other times they saw a man standing in the distance watching houses. Investigators believed the attacker learned the daily routines of his victims. He knew when husbands left for work. He knew when families returned home. He even learned the layout of certain houses. The crimes were calculated and methodical. Detectives realized they were dealing with someone extremely organized. But the suspect always disappeared before police could arrive. No fingerprints. No clear witnesses. No identity. By the late 1970s, the crimes were no longer limited to Sacramento. Similar attacks appeared in other counties across California. Investigators in Contra Costa County and Ventura County began noticing disturbing similarities. The suspect used the same methods. The same careful planning. The same silent approach. residents across entire communities began locking their doors earlier each night. Police departments increased patrols. But the attacker remained one step ahead. Some investigators believed the suspect had knowledge of police procedures. He seemed to understand how long it took officers to respond to calls. He knew when to escape. And he knew how to disappear. Then something strange happened. The crimes suddenly stopped. For years, the mysterious attacker vanished. No new reports. No new clues. Detectives had no idea if the suspect moved away, or simply changed his behavior. The case slowly became what investigators fear most. A cold case. Boxes of evidence were placed into storage. Old witness reports were archived. The files gathered dust in police evidence rooms. Families of victims waited for answers that never came. Decades later, cold case investigators began reviewing the old files. One detective believed the case could still be solved. His name was Paul Holes. Holes had spent years studying unsolved cases across California. He believed modern forensic technology could reveal answers hidden in the old evidence. During the original investigations, detectives had preserved biological samples from the crime scenes. In the 1970s, DNA technology didn't exist. But by the 2000s, it had become one of the most powerful tools in criminal investigations. Still, there was one major problem. The suspect's DNA didn't match anyone in police databases. For years, investigators reached a dead end. Until someone proposed a completely new idea. Instead of searching criminal databases, investigators decided to try something unusual. They uploaded the DNA profile to a genealogy website called GeneMatch. This website allowed people to trace their family ancestry using DNA. The result surprised everyone. There was no direct match. But there were distant relatives. People who shared tiny fragments of DNA with the suspect. Genealogists began building massive family trees. They traced relatives backward through generations. Then forward again through modern families. Slowly, the list of possible suspects became smaller. Eventually, one name stood out. The investigation led detectives to a quiet suburban neighborhood in Citrus Heights. The suspect they identified was Joseph James DeAngelo. DeAngelo was a former police officer. He had worked in law enforcement decades earlier. Neighbors described him as an ordinary man. He worked in his yard. He lived quietly. Nothing about him suggested he could be connected to one of the most infamous criminal investigations in the state. But detectives were not ready to make an arrest yet. They needed proof. Investigators began secretly monitoring DeAngelo. They watched his house. They followed his movements. Eventually, detectives collected something he threw away in the trash. Inside that trash was a used tissue. Scientists extracted DNA from the tissue and compared it to the evidence preserved from the original crimes. The results came back. It was a match. After decades of mystery, investigators finally knew the truth. On April 24, 2018, police surrounded DeAngelo's home. Officers approached carefully. The man who had avoided capture for decades was finally taken into custody. The arrest shocked the entire country. For years, the suspect had lived quietly among neighbors. No one realized the secrets he was hiding. In 2020, Joseph James DeAngelo pleaded guilty to numerous crimes connected to the investigation. For the victims and their families, the case finally had an ending. Many had waited more than 40 years to learn the truth. The investigation also changed law enforcement forever. Today, genetic genealogy is helping detectives reopen hundreds of cold cases across the United States. Cases once thought impossible to solve are now being investigated again. Because sometimes the evidence never disappears. Sometimes it just waits for science to catch up. And today, hundreds of cold cases across America are being reopened using the same technique. Which case will be solved next?